A woman stepped into a small inflatable dinghy with her husband and was never seen again. No distress call, no emergency signal, no witness. Just open water, a dark night, and one man's account of what he says happened out there. That man is Brian Hooker, a 59-year-old from Onstead, Michigan, and for nearly 2 months, his version of events was the only version investigators had to work with. But here is the problem. Brian Hooker's own phone was with him that entire night, and the GPS data recorded on that device tells a completely different story from the one he gave authorities. New information suggests Brian Hooker gave false information to police about what happened to his wife Lynette after her disappearance in the Bahamas. Location data from his phone contradicts what he told police. Fox 2 Detroit, subscribe to TrueMark channel right now. This case is still actively developing, and every time a new detail surfaces, we will be the first to break it down for you. Hit the bell so you do not miss a single update on this case. This is the disappearance of Lynette Hooker, a 55-year-old experienced sailor, a woman who left behind a life on land to live full-time on the open sea, and who has not been found despite one of the largest maritime searches the Bahamas has seen in recent years. Everything you are about to hear is based entirely on verified reporting from federal investigators, law enforcement statements, court documents, and first-hand accounts from Lynette's family. Nothing in this documentary is speculation. Every detail is confirmed and sourced, and when you hear how far apart Brian Hooker's account and the GPS data actually are, you will understand why federal investigators did not just reopen this case. They went back to a completely different part of the ocean. Let us start from the very beginning. Before we follow the investigation, you need to understand who Lynette Hooker was, because the version of her that appeared in early media coverage, a woman who simply fell from a boat, is missing a great deal of context. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. On the water, she came alive. The ocean was not just a backdrop for her. She called it her happy place. CNN, her mother, Darlene Hamlet, told reporters that the family grew up on water and that her daughter's entire life had been near lakes, on boats, sailing and swimming, the Durango Herald. This was not something she discovered in her later years. Water was part of who she was from the very beginning. Lynette was born in 1970 and spent most of her life in Michigan. She had a daughter, Carly Aylesworth, from a previous relationship. In the year 2000, she married Brian Hooker, Conan Daly. Together, the two built a life that looked, from the outside, like everything most people only dream about. They described themselves on social media as a married couple, living their best life. They had sailed to New Orleans, Key West, Miami Beach, and across Lake Michigan. They documented those years of sailing around the Caribbean on their Sailing Hookers Facebook page, posting videos that drew a following of people who watched their life unfold in real time, the Durango Herald. In video after video, Lynette appears in motion, wind in her hair, sun on her shoulders, and almost always, just within reach, is Brian. Together, they built a life at sea and documented it in intimate, often cheerful posts, sailing in calm water, cooking meals using a solar oven aboard their boat, exploring islands most people only see in photographs. CNN, that was the image the world saw. But the people closest to Lynette knew a more complicated picture had been building for years. Carly Aylesworth told reporters that the couple had a history of contention and that their relationship was volatile, with a pattern of not getting along, especially when they were drinking. That pattern had surfaced in official records years before the Bahamas trip. In 2015, a Kentwood, Michigan police report documented an incident where Brian and Lynette accused each other of assault. Brian, who was intoxicated and had a bleeding nose, told officers that Lynette had struck him multiple times. Lynette, who an officer described as highly intoxicated, told police that Brian had struck her as well. Lynette was arrested and spent the night in jail. A warrant was ultimately denied because investigators could not determine who had initiated the incident. East Idaho News. The case was closed without charges. But it was not the end of the tension inside that marriage. Carly told CNN that her mother had previously confided in her that Brian had placed his hands around her throat during a dispute. CNN was unable to independently confirm that account with law enforcement. Brian Hooker's attorney pushed back on growing speculation, arguing that without finding Lynette, Any conclusions about foul play were premature. CNN What is documented is this. By early 2024, the marriage had come to a breaking point. Messages that Lynette sent to a close friend in January 2024, obtained by CBS News, show the couple had separated. In those messages, Lynette wrote, "I guess it was too much closeness. We decided to call it quits. I'm not going back." Newsweek. Those words carry significant weight. A woman who had built her entire life around living at sea with her husband was now saying she was finished. She was not going back. But then, approximately 1 month later, in late February 2024, Lynette's messages to that same friend suggest she and Brian had reconciled. Newsweek. From separation to reconciliation in the span of a single month. And then, roughly 6 weeks after that reconciliation, the two of them were in the Bahamas together, on a boat. At night, that boat had a name, the Soulmate, and it is the soulmate that sits at the center of everything investigators now believe about the night Lynette Hooker vanished. To understand what investigators are now questioning, you have to understand what Brian Hooker told them, because his account is the foundation on which the entire original search was built. According to information provided during the investigation, Lynette and Brian spent the evening of April 4th in Hopetown, a popular boating destination in the Abaco Islands. Gaza Hopetown is a small, quiet settlement, the kind of place where sailors anchor for a few days, walk the narrow streets, and then head back out to sea. It is not a place known for trouble. At around 7:30 in the evening, the two departed Hopetown in their dinghy, heading toward their yacht, the Soulmate, anchored at Elbow Cay. Good morning, America. It was a short crossing, a trip they had likely made before without incident. The dinghy they were using was an 8-foot hard-bottom inflatable. It was this small vessel, not the Soulmate, that Lynette disappeared from. Brian Hooker told authorities what happened next. He said conditions on the water changed. That rough weather moved in. That Lynette lost her footing and went overboard. He told police that strong currents subsequently carried her away and that he lost sight of her. The Durango Herald. Then came the detail that immediately drew scrutiny. Brian told investigators that the dinghy lost power because Lynette had the engine safety key, also known as a kill switch lanyard, when she fell overboard. With the engine shut down and no way to restart it, he said he had no choice but to paddle. CBS News. Brian later left Carly Aylesworth a voicemail in which he said he had thrown a flotation device after his wife. CNN. That detail emerged later and became part of what investigators examined. Brian told Bahamian authorities that he paddled the vessel to shore, arriving at around 4 in the morning at Marsh Harbor Boat Yard, where he told someone what had happened. That person then informed police. NBC News let that timeline sit for a moment. The couple left Hopetown at approximately 7:30 in the evening. Brian did not reach shore and report his wife missing until 4 in the morning. That is more than 8 hours between the moment Lynette went into the water and the moment anyone with the ability to launch a search was notified. 8 hours. No mayday call, no emergency radio contact, no signal flare, nothing. 4 days after Lynette disappeared, Brian posted on Facebook that he was heartbroken over a boat accident in unpredictable seas and high winds that caused his beloved Lynette to fall from their small dinghy near Elbow Cay in the Bahamas. He wrote that despite desperate attempts to reach her, the winds and currents drove them further apart, and that finding her was his sole focus. Newsweek, that post was later removed, and the family of Lynette Hooker was already questioning everything. While search teams were organizing and media coverage was beginning to spread, Lynette's daughter Carly Aylesworth was already raising questions that no official had yet asked publicly. Carly told NBC News 3 days after her mother's disappearance that it was unlikely for Lynette, an experienced mariner, to simply fall into the water. Yahoo, she put it plainly. Her mother knew boats. Her mother knew the sea. The idea that she just fell did not hold up against everything. Carly knew about who her mother was. Carly told ABC News, "I don't understand how she drowned or got floated away. It just made me be more. Why didn't he do this? Why didn't you do that? Why did that happen?" Good morning, America. Those questions were not abstract. They were specific. Why was there no distress call in 8 hours? Why were neither of them wearing life vests on a nighttime crossing? Why did Brian not use the VHF radio that was available on the boat? And why, if finding Lynette was his sole focus, did the timeline between her going overboard and anyone being notified stretch across an entire night? Carly traveled to the Bahamas to assist with the search. She met directly with the Coast Guard and with Bahamian authorities. Good morning, America. She was not there to grieve quietly. She was there to push. Carly told CBS News, "My sole concern is to find out what happened to my mother and make sure a full and complete investigation is performed into her disappearance." CBS News, meanwhile, the picture of the marriage continued to deepen. Carly told NBC News that her mother and Brian had a history of not getting along, especially when they drink. NBC News, and this was not just a daughter's impression, it was documented. Back in 2015, a police report from Kentwood, Michigan, had captured one of those nights in detail. Lynette's daughter told CNN the couple had a turbulent marriage that had at times become physical. She said her mother had previously confided that Brian had placed his hands around her throat during a dispute. CNN, Brian Hooker's legal team denied those claims, calling any conclusions premature without evidence. What investigators did have, however, was the January 2024 text message exchange. Lynette had written to a friend that she and Brian had separated and that she was not going back. And yet weeks later, she reconciled with him. And weeks after that, she was on a boat in the Bahamas with him at night. The search for Lynette was underway. But for Carly Aylesworth, the more important search was for the truth about what actually happened on that water. Within hours of Brian Hooker reporting Lynette missing at Marsh Harbor Boat Yard on the morning of April 5th, Bahamian authorities launched a large-scale sea and shoreline search that included the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, and rescue crews. The U.S. Coast Guard joined the operation. Helicopters covered the area from above. Patrol vessels worked the water below. The designated search zone was built entirely around the location Brian Hooker had described to authorities. That was all they had. One account, one set of coordinates, one person's word about where Lynette went into the water. The search continued for weeks, and it found nothing, not a life vest, not debris from the dinghy, not any physical trace of Lynette Hooker anywhere in the area Brian's OOP account had pointed investigators toward. On April 8th, 4 days after Lynette vanished, Brian Hooker was arrested by Bahamian authorities. Good morning, America. Edvardo Dames, the Assistant Commissioner of the Royal Bahamas Police, told Reuters that Brian Hooker was taken into custody at around 7:30 in the evening for additional questioning based on probable cause they had developed. Dames confirmed he's been taken into custody as a suspect. He's been arrested. Newsweek, Brian Hooker's attorney Terrell Butler said at the time that his client categorically and unequivocally denied any wrongdoing. Butler described his client as appearing completely heartbroken and deeply distressed, with his primary concern being his inability to continue searching for his wife of 25 years. CBS News. During his 5 days in custody, authorities executed a search warrant on the couple's boat. That warrant allowed them to seize a digital video recorder, digital tablets, and cell phone-related equipment. Investigators stated these devices may contain material evidence related to the case. CBS News. After 5 days, Brian Hooker was released without charge. However, Royal Bahamas Police Commissioner Shanta Knowles confirmed publicly that the investigation was ongoing and that Hooker would remain a suspect. The day after his release, Brian Hooker gave an interview to ABC News. He told reporters he was staying in the Bahamas with a sole focus of finding his wife. ABC News. Hours after that interview, he left the Bahamas. Brian returned to the United States on April 15th, roughly 10 days after Lynette vanished. His attorney said he wanted to be with his terminally ill mother. Attack of the Fanboy. A Facebook post he had published 4 days after Lynette's disappearance, describing what he called a boat accident in unpredictable seas, was removed. Attack of the Fanboy. Bahamian search teams were still working the water. The U.S. Coast Guard had opened a separate criminal investigation, and deep inside the devices seized from the soulmate, something was waiting to be found. Act 6. The evidence that changed everything nearly 6 weeks after Lynette Hooker disappeared, the investigation made a move that shifted the entire course of the case. The Coast Guard Investigative Service seized the couple's sailboat, the Soulmate, approximately 40 nautical miles south of Florida. CBS News. This was not a routine inspection. When a vessel is formally seized as part of a criminal probe, it means investigators believe the boat itself holds answers. The Soulmate was docked at the Coast Guard station in Fort Pierce, Florida. Forensic analysts went to work on every electronic system aboard: navigation logs, engine data, communication records, and then came the details that would rewrite the entire investigation. Investigators discovered that aboard the Soulmate was an infrared camera capable of detecting heat radiation. Investigators looked into whether that camera, which uses a cloud memory system, was in use on the night Lynette disappeared. CBS News. But the most significant piece of evidence was not on the boat at all. It was on Brian Hooker's phone. The new investigation was based on GPS data from Brian Hooker's phone, on which he was using a marine navigation app. Fox News GPS data derived from one of Brian Hooker's electronic devices showed a track of his movements that does not align with what he told investigators. CBS News. Read that carefully. The device Brian Hooker carried with him all night recorded where he actually was, and that record does not match his account. Investigators said the electronic data showed the device moving on the water, stopping at a specific point in the Sea of Abaco, and then returning, stopping, and then returning. If Brian Hooker had truly been paddling helplessly through dark water for more than 8 hours, his GPS track would show a slow, inconsistent drift moving in one direction. It would not show a vessel navigating with purpose to a specific location, pausing there, and then heading back. Investigators were searching in the wrong area of the Sea of Abaco the entire time, based on the information Brian Hooker had given them. NBC Chicago. Every helicopter pass, every patrol vessel sweep, every hour of the massive search operation, all of it had been focused on a location that the GPS data now suggests was never the accurate location from the start. Now investigators had a new question. If the original search area was wrong, where should they have been looking? The answer was sitting in the data, with GPS data pointing to a completely different section of the Sea of Abaco. Federal investigators moved quickly. GPS data from Brian Hooker's phone obtained by authorities showed a discrepancy between what he first told law enforcement. That discrepancy prompted federal authorities to seek permission from Bahamian authorities to search a new area in the Sea of Abaco with 25-foot deep waters. Fox News. Because the search would take place in Bahamian territorial waters, U.S. authorities could not simply deploy assets. They needed permission. The Bahamas granted the Coast Guard Investigative Service permission to send U.S. divers to search the new areas. ABC News. Investigators believe GPS information extracted from at least one electronic device has identified previously unsearched areas where divers should now look for additional evidence. CBS News. The dive team was not going in blind. They had coordinates, they had a specific depth range, and they had a case that had grown significantly beyond a maritime accident inquiry. Within days of the disappearance, the Coast Guard had opened a criminal investigation into Lynette Hooker's disappearance. CNN. By the time the dive team entered the water, that investigation had expanded across multiple federal agencies. The rest of the evidence recovered right from the case is still being processed by the FBI at its laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. CBS News. What exactly is being examined at Quantico has not been publicly disclosed, but the scope of a federal laboratory analysis, combined with a dive operation in new waters, tells you how seriously investigators are now treating this case. Carly Aylesworth provided her DNA to the U.S. Coast Guard to assist in their investigation into her mother's disappearance. NBC Chicago. That request for DNA from family members confirms that investigators are not searching for a missing person. They are searching for remains. Meanwhile, Brian Hooker's Bahamas-based attorney Terrell Butler declined to comment on the new search, citing the ongoing investigation. His client has denied any wrongdoing in relation to his wife's disappearance. NBC News. Brian Hooker has not been charged with a crime. His current whereabouts are not publicly known. The divers are in the water, the FBI is processing evidence, and the Sea of Abaco is giving up nothing easily. Act 8. Where things stand here is where this case stands as of today. Lynette Hooker, a 55-year-old experienced sailor from Onstead, Michigan, has been missing since the evening of April 4, 2024. She was a woman who sold her home, chose a life on the open ocean, and documented that life in videos that showed her exactly where she wanted to be. Her husband, Brian, gave authorities an account of that night that placed him at the mercy of dark water, a dead engine, and 8 hours of paddling with no way to call for help. His own phone recorded something different. Location data from his phone directly contradicts what he told police. Fox 2 Detroit. The device shows movement on the water with intention, a stop at a specific point in the Sea of Abaco, and a return. Not a drift, not a slow, helpless paddle through the dark, a track. That track sent a federal dive team to a section of the ocean that no one searched during those first desperate weeks when every hour mattered. Carly Aylesworth is still fighting for her mother. She flew to the Bahamas, met with investigators, submitted her DNA, and has not stopped pressing for a complete investigation. She told ABC News, "This feels like something you just watch in a movie, but it's my life." Good Morning America. Lynette's mother, Darlene Hamlet, told reporters her daughter grew up on water, that the sea was always part of her, and somewhere in that same sea, investigators believe the answers are still waiting to be found. Brian Hooker has not been charged. He has denied any wrongdoing. The investigation is ongoing. But here is the question that this case keeps returning to. If the location data from his own device does not match the account he gave authorities, and investigators spent weeks searching the wrong section of ocean as a result, then what actually happened on that boat on the night of April 4th? That question does not yet have an official answer. But the dive team is still in the water, and the GPS does not forget. We will be covering every update on this case as it develops. If you are not subscribed yet, do it right now. This is exactly the kind of case that moves fast, and you do not want to be the last to know when the next development breaks. If you want to understand how investigators use digital forensics to reconstruct what witnesses will not tell them, our next video covers exactly that. Lynette Hooker deserves answers. Her daughter deserves answers. This case is not over.